See what I've got there? We didn't even have time for hair and makeup. This was such short notice, but I'm happy to do this presentation. We did one in the fall, and it's effective behaviors for successful LVT installation. And I think this format is very difficult to do technical, hands-on sorts of presentations. So I wanted to talk about a completely different approach, the human component to LVT installation, which I think is the lion's share of where the success comes from. So without further ado, I'll just walk you through quickly what we're going to talk about, and more specifically, what we're not going to do. We'll look at the category, not the brand. I happen to look after Carndine for Canada, but it is a product like many other products. And so it's the category that's of most interest here.
Hey, Tim, can I just interrupt? Are you able to kill your notes, which we can see?
Oh, you can see my notes. Sure. Let me just drop it for a sec and move it. Let's just start that again. My apologies. How about now?
Still see them.
Still see them. Let me just switch the screens. Let me just do this. Hang on a second. Stop sharing. Share screen. How about now?
There you go.
There we go. My apologies. Getting a little rusty here. A little eggnog hangover. So yeah, it's not about the brand, it's about the category. If it's available in an instruction, I'm not going to talk about it. That's part of your responsibility if you're an installer or somebody in the industry that deals with this product. Those are things you should be reading and understanding. But it's important to note that we all take on information differently. In our company, we do a series of different tests. And it's interesting, from one person to the next, we don't all absorb information the same way, which begs the question, are you asking the right questions when you don't understand something? What's an effective behavior? We want to cover that because that's the primary focus of this. And why does it matter? And stick to the principles that we have as a business and hope to share with everybody else, is that it's about having fun, making money and doing right. And that applies to everybody. It applies to your family, your friends, your stakeholders, your customers, your suppliers. And then you got to keep an open mind as we walk through this and have a learning mindset. Some things I might discuss might be a little controversial if you're not prepared for them. So without further ado, let's move on. Installation of a product requires somebody with skill. And more often than not, we don't know whether they have it or not until something goes wrong. But I've just listed some random skills that a standard installer might have in his bag of tricks or her bag of tricks when it comes to the installation of flooring. Estimating, mixing and spreading, even as far as cleanup's concerned. But as I said, do you know whether or not they actually can do any of this stuff until they get on the scene and something goes wrong? So an effective behavior boils down to knows how to, is able to, and can demonstrate it. So in simpler terms, a skill would be measuring, marking, and layouts. The effective behavior starts with knows how to measure, use measuring tools. Can they use a tape measure? Well, that's pretty standard stuff. Can they use standard levels? Can they use laser levels, a little bit more sophisticated? And then is able to, they can use the tool, they can pull the tape out, but can they actually read it? Can they convert it? Depending, some products are expressed in square meters. If it's a European product, can they convert it to square yards? Is more standard, more square feet, more specifically to our market. And then can they demonstrate the basic math skills? Can they add and subtract? And this is just one of a multitude of different things that they might need to do. When we look at installation, more often than not, we just look at it from the point of view that they, they can bang it in. Great. They can spread glue. Yeah, I think they can. And therefore we send them out in a job until we realize that there's something that's missing in the mix.
A lot of times I think it's the shortcoming on the sales side where some difficult conversations don't happen with the, let's say, pick a scenario of the homeowner, where the homeowner doesn't want to talk about the cost of subfloor prep. And so maybe the salesperson doesn't have a frank conversation about that. And so the next person who shows up on site is the installer. The installer absolutely does not want to have that conversation and won't. And there you set up a scenario for fail right there.
Exactly. Why is it important? It's important to challenge, right? This is one thing our industry doesn't do until it's too late. And then it becomes a finger pointing exercise. And as humans, we have two systems in our brain, system one, system two. We tend to jump to conclusions. If I don't know anybody in this call, but I've heard it more often than not. I have 30 years experience. How dare you challenge me on what I'm seeing here? And it's you, 30 years, regrettably, is usually one year, 30 times. And using system two, our thinking brain is a little too difficult. We tend to assemble, things that suit the narrative we're about to spill and let it rip. And then we double down, called cognitive dissonance. And it becomes a battle of wills between, supplier, installer, retailer, a manufacturer, until somebody loses. And it's just not the way to go. If we back it up and say, okay, when we're exchanging business with the installation community, for example, do we actually know, have we pressure tested any of these skills, and are they the right person to put on the tools, right? And this would be a system for starting to establish some of the things. You could take back to the previous slide, just take the list of skills and establish effective behaviors against all of those skills to at least give yourself a fighting chance to know whether or not you've got the right person or the wrong person. Again, we haven't talked about any products at this moment in time. It's down to human behavior and decision-making and choices. Most importantly, he doesn't want to walk away, right? Some jobs are just not the right job to do. That job choice to walk away might happen on the sales floor, in the specification process. It can happen in a multitude of different areas. When the product arrives on the job site, things just aren't right. Walking away sometimes is the best thing to do, because it stops that cascading effect that starts to build dollar losses in multitudes. Is able to. Now, when I started with the product back in the late 90s, it was glue down. And we approached it from the point of view that we thought natural materials were beautiful, but they weren't always practical. It wasn't a catch-all magic pill to fill every opportunity for sales. It was about a practical alternative to a natural product. And we know what that means. Ski resort, ski boots, hardwood, probably not a great option, where LVT in a condo at a ski resort might be a better choice. But the construction of these products are pretty much the same. There's pressed products and there's calendared products, but they all consist of a clear wear layer with some level of PU on top to resist scuffing. And in the early days, there was no PU. So you'd get most of your callbacks on scuffing, marking, and, particularly when Aldo was popular with a lot of black soled shoes, you'd see a lot of burn marks in floors. And that PU wear layer eliminated a lot of those problems. The money's in the film. It's part of what distinguishes a very expensive product compared to a less expensive product, how much investment goes into making the film. More often than not, the standard is a print film library sells a print film to a manufacturer, or the manufacturer has their own print film production, and they sell it to a supplier, and a product is produced that suits the market that they're trying to serve. In other cases, those print films are cultivated by the actual manufacturer. They're proprietary, they're copyrighted, and they usually have a little bit more oomph in them, more realism, because there's more at stake. There's a stabilizing layer, which helps make all these different surfaces work in concert with each other. And then there is a there is a backing layer of PVC. The stabilizing layer will have chalk and fiberglass and that sort of thing in it. We migrated, and then there was a company out of British Columbia that did a bang up job at making loose lay floors, the IT product for a while. And it leveraged simplicity. Glue down required a higher level of skill than maybe a loose lay floor. You mean I can get away with putting this floor in without using a ton of glue? Fantastic, I'm all over it. It kind of was the next best thing to maybe having a click type floor that everybody was used to from the laminate days. And again, the surface marrying is pretty much the same, except the last two layers where the differentiator is, and that would be the stabilizing layer now. In some products has a sheet of fiberglass for more stability. So you see less movement on a loose lay floor than you would on, let's say, a glue down floor. And then various types of backing for sound attenuation and slip movement resistance and so forth. And then we migrate to a rigid core floor, which steps off the lust for click floors, because click was simplistic, but it brought about another consideration, which I'll refer to in a second. Again, a layered product. This time there's a clicking mechanism as your center core, and then some proprietary backings depending on whether it has a sound attenuating backing or not. There is SPC, there's WPC, there's EPC. There's now a group, and they've knocked it down to WPC and SPC, just to keep it simple. But here's the rub. The easier the product becomes to install, the more you remove the professional installer or the need for the professional. So you open this up all of a sudden to the homeowner, the DIYer, and they get to get their hands on it. The benefit in some cases is that they have lower expectations for their own skills. So if they screw up, so be it. But it also is taking food off our tables if we're in the professional installation business. And it just is not the right way to go to simplify everything just for the sake of simplification. The most important thing is that we do as an industry what we've always done, and that is to try and simplify everything to sell more of it, but it doesn't necessarily mean it's the right thing. The best floor in this scenario, in most cases, would be a glue down floor. The rigid core floor really is the best floor where somebody doesn't want to rip up a subfloor, or they've got multiple surfaces at the same height and they don't want to skim coat the grout. Then they might choose that as a better alternative because the cost of removing the old product is prohibitive.
Just to touch on that, Tim, the rigid core, what we see in the world of inspections is many of those floors fail because the subfloor is not presented flat enough. Those floors seem to be as strong as the subfloor is flat because of the rigid nature of the product and the brittle nature of the tongue and groove clip joint. As soon as you get any deviation or deflection, you get a tendency for those joints to fracture maybe. Do you experience much of that?
Yeah, it's along that line of thought that just because it's a little bit easier on the installation side doesn't mean you have to avoid some of the standards that are standard practice across all finishes in this category, right? But that tends to be the way the brain starts to work. It drives you in that direction. I can get away with this, I can cut that out, and the net effect is a failure in most cases. And I want to speak to that because, you know, the finger pointing that goes on is well known to everybody on this call. I'll guarantee you that. But there are some things that are constant. And so we need to eliminate the constants and focus on where some of the real issues will arise. The product is made in a factory. Factories, probably for the most part, are under ISO 9000 or 14,000 standards. There's an engineer, there's a chemist involved in the development of the product. There's quality control people, there's machinery that's tuned. Yes, from time to time it goes out of whack, but for the most part, it's a pretty controlled environment. Then the product is shipped, put on a container. That container is then moved to North America. And then it goes to a wholesaler. Here's where the variables begin. The wholesaler might have a multitude of different products. They might not believe in training. They might, or it might be the individual that decides that they know everything, that they've got 30 years experience and they want to sell something. There's self-interest involved here. And they start creating and overselling a product that might not be suitable. And our products get lumped into this category all the time. But for the most part, that goes onto a truck and out to a retailer. It's a pretty controlled environment once you take the salesperson out of it. And I credit myself with being a salesperson, but we're known to tell a story or two or to stretch the truth. It gets to the retail shop and then it starts to get complicated. If you've ever done a PK at a retail environment, sometimes people show up, sometimes people don't show up, sometimes the older staff intimidate the newer staff. Questions don't get asked. There's all sorts of things that can go on in this environment that means the information doesn't get disseminated in the way it needs to make sure that somebody is making the right choices, making the right recommendations. If you take the food chain up to that point, it's say, how many suppliers are there of LVT in Canada? But now you take the number of retailers, let's say it's 1,000, and there's 2 salespeople in every retailer, you've changed the variables by 2,000. And then all of a sudden we add the installation community into it. And let's say there's 2 installers servicing that need in every installation or every retailer. And now you got 2,000 installers. As the story gets told, we've all played as kids, the electric telephone, the information starts to degrade as it goes around the table. And I think this is what we see all the time. What was meant to be the right information, by the time it gets to somebody with 30 years experience, they're a chemist, they're a physicist, they're all sorts of different things, and they make choices that are out of the control of other people in the chain of command. And then it gets to a home. Canada, we've got houses in Tuktoyaktuk, Victoria, St. John's, Newfoundland. We got them all over the place. Some are stick frame, some are brick, some are concrete, some are at 40 degrees below zero, some are at 10 degrees, some are at 38 degrees, all over the map. So it again provides all sorts of variables that puts them into the mix that change the equation. So one set play does not necessarily follow through for every scenario. And one product isn't always suitable for every application. So if it's back to rigid core, it doesn't belong everywhere. Just like glue down has some places it wouldn't belong, and loose lay has some it belongs and doesn't belong. Fork in the road, cost control. Let's say you're an installer or a retailer that sold the job. You got a vested interest in this and its success. You got choices. How do you handle the product? Just receiving the product. We've seen it time and time again. The truck is backed up at our door. It's a freezing cold day and it's the installers picking it up. I know they're not delivery people. They're going right to a job site, and within an hour or a couple of hours, that product's going onto the floor. And then you get the call, well, it gapped out. Usually it's something to do with the handling. Storage and acclimation, is it in the house in the appropriate length of time? Is the temperature right? Chris had an article that I saw recently about, you get in, they don't want to pay for the heat until somebody's paying for the house. So they keep it as low as possible, but the flooring's in there. And all of a sudden on the day, within the hour, they crank the heat up to what's supposed to be the recommended temperature. And all of a sudden the product starts to expand, and then they leave the job site turn the heat back down. The glue hasn't, sorted itself out. And guess what? You got a gapping problem. Moisture. Doesn't feel damp in here. I don't smell musty or anything like that. All of a sudden, we've got the nose of a golden retriever, and we can tell those sorts of things. And how often do people just decide that they're going to eliminate a moisture test and leave it up to chance? It's like a game of Russian roulette. One bullet eventually will get you, and it could be a catastrophic financial situation if you get it wrong. So moisture tests should be taken. Floor prep. One of those things that people in retail don't want to talk about, because there's somebody down the street that's probably not going to talk about it to get the job. So I'm not going to talk about it. And guess what? Floor prep needs to be done. You're talking about a 2, 3, or 4 millimeter product that needs a smooth floor, 3/16 over 10 feet deviation. I don't know many floors that you go into that you pull back the carpet that was put down by the builder, that's the way the floor looks. It needs some kind of skim coat or floor preparation. Why are we avoiding it? Adhesive application. Again, see it all the time. Spread a whole room out, go for a smoke, let it tack up, and away we go. Each manufacturer has little different nuances with their adhesive. There was a time when all the LVT glue down adhesive was done with a wet set. And if you were in Winnipeg in the middle of winter, there was so little humidity, you could probably get about 2 planks down before the stuff dried up and you had to scrape it back. So the adhesive progress migrated to more flexible adhesives, and they were universal, but they said in their instructions, perhaps as a marketing ploy, wet set may be installed tackified. So what do? It's easier to tack it up and install it that way, but it wasn't the right thing for that particular job. When it comes to adhesive, you got to be very specific in what you're doing and what the conditions are. You just can't use a one size fits all. If they say you can let it tack up, make sure you can let it tack up and what you're trying to do and what substrate you're working with. Cutting and fitting. We've all been out and about. We've seen some commercial jobs. You go into a washroom, male or female, and you see that clear out drain. Did they not have a circle cutter? Did they not have that fundamental skill of being able to cut and fit around something? In some cases, it looked like they used a pair of kindergarten scissors to cut and fit that particular job. So having the basic skills and taking the time to know how to cut odd angles around circles, pipes, and so forth is also, part of the right way to do things. If you choose to skip any of these things, you put yourself at risk, right? And our experience has been the cost is usually 4 times what it was for the original job. And the damage that you do across the ecosystem of supplier, customer, homeowner, commercial account, whatever it is, can be catastrophic. So why let that happen? Now, the more pressing point here is if you're in the installation community or if in the sales business, you sold the job or you quoted the job at set price. Any one of the things on this list can erode your profit. And so proceed with caution. Chris, that was sort of a slide that is near and dear to your heart. Do you have anything you'd like to comment on there?
You mean like the speed of delivery,
No, just the last slide. Sorry, I jumped ahead. The last slide, because these are the issues that you talk about all the time.
Yeah, I go back to that slide again. I mean, for floor prep, I was on a job recently with rigid core again, and the installer was actually a Finnish carpenter. He was becoming a floor installer for the week, and he's a smart guy and he knew how to cut tightly. He did a nice installation, but the problem was, having prepped the floor and poured leveling compound and done the grinding work and gotten it flat to 3/16 over 10 feet, he then installed, you know, these rigid core products mostly come with a 1 millimeter back attached rubber pad or some kind of underlayment, but it's attached to the back, and there's very, very little give in that underlayment. Anyway, this guy went and purchased a 3 millimeter foam underlay, installed the underlay, and then installed the rigid core over top of that. And just about everywhere you walked in the high traffic areas, the tongue and groove or the click joint broke. So now the boards were operating like piano keys. And I just like, what, he did a beautiful installation, but why would you put an underlay down? And he just thought that that's what he needed to do. And when you read the installation guidelines, it's underlined, no extra underlay shall be installed with this product. I don't know what you do to avoid issues like that. It's just training, and read the installation guidelines. As for all this list of issues you pointed out, they're all great points to make. The installation guidelines in every product pretty much covers advice and requirements for all these things. So you just got to slow down and make sure that the folks that are on the front line do actually pay attention to these things. Otherwise, it can cost you an arm and a leg.
Thank you. We all love to push the limits. You know, use speeding as the analogy. The speed limit typically is 100 on a highway. We all do 120. If you're in the east, 130, 140 until it's lose your car time. As I mentioned, I put this graphic up, you know, if the pickup truck with the guys are following the delivery truck right there, something's already started to go wrong. So here in a sales position, you've established a beautiful relationship with a customer. You've sold them a vision of their new floor, and somebody's decided to screw it up on you right from the get-go. So we see this too often. And I've already sort of addressed the reasons that it sort of manifests itself or how it manifests itself. But if we're looking at cause and effect, you know, any business worth their salt that's dealing with product that's being sold through to other people and being installed are going to record bad experiences or claims. And so I've just taken over the many, many years that we've done it. I've recorded what, you know, the things that do go wrong. And for us in areas that we've recorded in our system, there's a claim and there's a complaint. I mean, the worst call you can get is somebody scratched the floor. I don't recall it coming out of the box scratched. I didn't recall pulling my refrigerator over it and scratching it, but you still have to contend with it. And then there's actual product complaints, some of which could be manufacturing related, and some of them could be installation related, and some of it could be it was just purely oversold. But anything in red, we don't consider a claim. Gapping is related to different things. It could be acclimation due to, you know, being on site, but it being at the wrong time, the temperature and the temperature being changed. If you climbed a set of stairs or a bunch of stairs with a plank box on your shoulder and it was flexing, you're bending and flexing that plank and you put it from the box onto the floor, you've still got a minuscule amount of stretch in the product that could conceivably work its way out, and it's not detectable to you until it is. Lifting and peaking, usually an adhesion usually brought about by moisture in the substrate, and it's finding its way out, which causes the lifting and the peaking. Anything in the black, we would consider a manufacturer's product. And if a manufacturer or supplier doesn't sort this out for you, then you need to find another manufacturer or supplier. It's pretty self-evident. 70% of the problems that we deal with and we record are related to an installation problem. Now, choice or skill is the question. You've got 4 photographs here. Was it a choice or was it a skill issue? And I'll help you out because the nature of the way this communication is going, that the top two and the bottom right are all choices. And and they're not great photographs, but claims are never beautiful. The bottom left is a skill issue. So I'll just explain the one with the cork and the undulation and the plank. This was a job where the homeowner wanted a soft, comfy floor. And there is documented evidence on our part that 7 instances where we said in emails that we do not recommend our product to be put over a cork underlayment. The retailer chose to ignore that, handed it to the installer. The installer decided to buy only 50% of the adhesive that was required to even put the cork down properly. And of course, a failure. It was also sold with proper plywood, and yet you're seeing aspenite on the floor there, all choices. That cost the retailer $30,000 and a lot of bad press. And you say, why did it have to go that way? You know, if you had selling skills, you should be able to sell all the right stuff and tell the customer to do the right thing or walk away. Again, back to the other part of our conversation.
Tim,
The one on the left, sorry?
Quick comment on that. The adhesives are very specifically engineered, designed, manufactured to work based on coverage and a certain amount of adhesive going down. And there's always this tendency to try and cut corners and not use that last pail, but you do it at serious risk of bond failure. And the other thing in the world of adhesives, apart from correct quantities being used, is when we decide to switch out the adhesive to maybe a universal brand that is not guaranteed or for sure going to work with the product that you're installing. Each of these products align with different adhesives in some cases, where if you don't have the right combination, you can get plasticize or migration. You can have the adhesive affect the product and it will then change shape. Bond can break down over time. So, I mean, I guess my message is A, use the right quantity and pay attention to it. It's meaningful. And B, make sure that, you know, if it's Go Resilience product that you're using their adhesive as well. And if you're not going to use it because they ran out or couldn't supply, that whatever you do use is warranted with the product.
Yeah, exactly. It's as I said earlier, that you know, there's chemists and engineers and scientists and so forth, and a pile of different testing to determine that in a variety of different situations, these products will work and where they won't work. But somehow we all think we're special and our circumstances are different, that we can make these judgments and decide to choose not to do something that was required in the thing, and just, you know, and again, you can get away with it for quite a bit of time, but until you can't. And then $30,000, what would it do to your business if you had to take that right off the bottom line? It could be, forgetting the reputational issues that come out of it. Just to add insult to injury on this particular one, the homeowner tracked us down, and the one thing that raised my interest very quickly was she said they've nailed the floor down, and they were using nails to hold the plank down where the adhesive wasn't holding it. And that's a new technique in LVT that I hadn't heard about. So I was curious to investigate. The bottom left is perhaps a skill issue that, you know, in the floor prep, they didn't quite get it right. And you can see that you've got the swirling striation marks of trowels, whether it's from the floor prep or whether it is adhesive that they got into too late and the trowel marks, the floor wasn't rolled, and it's starting to migrate through. Again, if you put a fishing line under LVT and there's a mechanical fix using an adhesive, eventually you'll see the fishing line. So you have to be very, very careful when you're doing it. Another one's skill and choice. I went to this job. It was a .com millionaire, beautiful cottage that he built. The layout of the floor was exceptional, and yet they had gapping issues. And quite often there's not a destructive test that goes on because we don't want to inconvenience the person on the other end, the homeowner. But it tells a lot. And looking at it, it just becomes finger pointing is subjective. But when you start to pull back the layers and see, there's some pretty revealing stuff here. In this particular case, it was the same room. These photographs were taken in the same room, just on opposite sides of the room. And he started on the left and finished on the right. And this adhesive requires 90% coverage. And you can see the back of the plank if you can. There's almost no coverage in the back of that plank. They also chose to install when there was just plywood up. There were no windows in the house, no doors in the house. And the homeowner was putting the screws in to get going. Again, there's a case for walking away. The picture on the right, one thing to keep in mind, adhesive is very good at holding things down. Think about a thin metal spatula on a very smooth wet counter with water. We've usually all experienced it where we try to pull that straight up and it doesn't come. You have to kind of slide it across the counter to get to the edge until you get air underneath it, and then it pops. Same thing here. You can spread adhesive and you can roll it on and it'll hold it straight down very successfully. But laterally, it won't. The lap shear strength of a plank will cause that to move. And in this particular case, there's virtually no adhesive. Almost looks like they used a completely different trowel by the time they got to the second side of the room. And you ended up with this massive gapping failure. So he chose to go ahead with it when the conditions weren't right. And he didn't look at his plank to see that he was getting the appropriate level of coverage according to what the PAL required, didn't roll the floor, and the trowel was either worn out by the time, it was a big area, by the time he got to this other side of the room. The measuring of the trowel had changed because the nubs in the trowel had been worn off, and he was only getting down basically to a pressure sensitive adhesion on the other side of the room when it called for a full spread. So choice has a lot to do with it, as well as skill. And sometimes the skill is just being able to say, these conditions aren't right. I'm going to come back on another occasion. Right?
And minimum standards state that you should provide or execute a bond test. Just stick a piece of the flooring down, check it with the adhesive, leave it for 72 hours. And, if your adhesive is designed to stick it down permanently, you cannot remove that piece of vinyl for love or money. It's adhesives are strong, powerful things. So we always recommend that. And most manufacturers are putting that in their installation guidelines these days too.
Yeah, the big mystery in all this, and depending on who's on the call, and if you're in the business of selling this product or installing this product, or whether you're a consumer of this product, your general contractor or whatever, it's vinyl. If I took a hairdryer to a piece of vinyl on my desk and put some marks as to where it was before I started and where it was by the time I turned the hairdryer or the hot air gun off, you're going to see a different size product there. It's no mystery that this stuff moves. It's this combination of adhesive or a stabilizing layer for loose lay or a rigid core or a mechanical fix with the joint that keeps the product from doing these sorts of things. That's why you have on a rigid core floor an expansion, room for an expansion around the walls, or you can't go over a certain distance because the product will expand and will contract. So when it comes to using adhesive, the purpose of the adhesive is to stop it from doing that. If it is doing that, something has gone wrong, right? And keep in mind, particularly if you're looking to put the onus back on the supplier, it's gone through a very rigid set of manufacturing protocols, been handled very carefully. They're easy boxes to store on pallets and stretch wrapped and packed and top caps. And there's not a lot going on by the time it ends up, gets broken down in a wholesaler and moved off onto a smaller pallet, but should be pretty well contained. But if it's moved, it's usually moved because somebody didn't follow the right methodology. And it's an unfortunate thing. And guess what? If you're buying product, you're usually buying a portion of what the wholesaler or manufacturer has in their inventory. And guess what? If it didn't do this in every other place, I'd say what makes this spot special? Because if it's not doing it in 5 other locations, but it's doing it here, then we have to look at the environment, the technique, the choice of adhesive, a variety of different things.
Hey,
Opportunity
Tim,
cost. Sorry.
Tim, I'm going to break with protocol here a little bit because we've got a very timely question here. It's a good question. I've asked it myself many times. I'll read it out. It says, I've been asked several times why acclimation is required for rigid core products when you can have temperature variances written into the installation guidelines that will range from like -20 to +90. The asker of the question has said, I have an answer that I'd give. However, I'd like to hear your explanation. Why are we acclimating products? I mean, obviously they're vinyl. There's vinyl involved. Vinyl expands with temperature, and but still, it just boggles my mind that the rigid core manufacturers are putting out there that you're good to go between minus too much and plus too much, if you know what I mean.
If you want, I can say that, Tim.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, so we changed the verbiage a little bit around our rigid core products, where we say for commercial applications, absolutely still acclimate. I think everyone on this call is also aware of the issues that we have with gapping, and that's also related sometimes to proper HVAC. And whose job is it to control the climate before and after the installer gets in and out? On a residential application, as long as you're within the temperature band that we suggest for installation temperature, which is 65 to 85 Fahrenheit, 18 to 29 Celsius, it's not required to have an acclimation period for rigid core products. Is it still good practice? Yes. So we still talk about it as such, but we have seen a bit of a shift. The -21 to 90, there's a lot of Me Too's out there in the market, and a lot of people add different components to their products, and the construction is different. So we can't speak for all products. There's just too much subjective things out there, but as a rule of thumb, that's where Carndean's stance is at this point.
That's good. I like that. That makes sense. I saw just recently on one company's installation guidelines that they don't require, they have that sort of -40 to +40 sort of language in their guidelines, but which suggests no worries about acclimation, just carry on. You don't have to pay attention to indoor environmental conditions. But then you read down and get to the radiant heat section, and it's all about temperature and all these restrictions, which does not make sense.
Back to Tim's point, I don't know why we're supporting that kind of business as an industry in general. We're supporting people being able to pick a color today, install it this afternoon kind of thing. And again, we're taking away from the industry and the professionals out there that rely on installations as a part of their business, right? So,
yeah, you know, as a purchaser, whether you're a dealership or an installer preparing to buy a product, if the installation guidelines don't make sense, don't buy the product.
Yeah, that's a good point. Back to adhesive, you know, there's some, because we've faced over the years, people making a choice to use something they're used to, or they've got a regular supply or an account with somebody. And when you read the instructions, they're a bit ambiguous because they're more marketing instructions than they are the right technical instructions. So they leave a lot of leeway, and it's very difficult at the end of the day to go back and blame the adhesion. It usually ends up at the foot of the person that's got the plank on the top, right? So I say this only because we all have the ability to challenge. And if we read and it doesn't make sense, it's incumbent upon everybody to ask the questions. And if you like the answer, then you would ask, would you put your John Henry on that, just to confirm it for me, so that if there is an issue in your own mind that goes south, at least the person had the wherewithal to commit to what they said that they were telling you to do. And I think if we did that more often, we'd have far fewer failures, rather than going in blind and just accepting at faith. Because there are situations where people are just piling on. This, when I first started doing this, there were probably 4 LVT suppliers. And I'm happy that there's so many now, because it's just improved the industry in terms of the acceptance of the product. So I have no beefs or complaints with anybody, but when you get the dog pile effect, you got a lot of people that are there for all the wrong reasons. And so you got to be well aware of keeping your wits about you to make sure you do ask the right questions and challenge those that you suspect aren't telling you the truth.
Quite often you don't get a choice about what products you're going to purchase. It's specified, and now you're the installer on site using something the construction team has in the documents. You've got no choice but to get on with it, whether it makes sense or not. So you're absolutely right. It's about conversation and having raising good questions and trying to solve these things before you go ahead with full installation.
Yeah.
It's not easy.
If this was a normal circumstance and we were in a big room and I could see people, and I know there were general contractors over here and flooring installers here and salespeople here and supplier there, I could look and address different things to different people. But I think if I was looking at that room and I asked, is there anybody in this room that's not in here to extract value, mean monetary value out of the exchange of goods or the installation of goods or what have you, I don't think I'd see very many hands go up. So it's important. We talked about cost control because it's a competitive market, and getting your price and being comfortable with it and coming away with everything that you hope for and being able to pay your bills and so forth and make a little profit is an important piece. So that cost control element cannot be overlooked. And those things are largely within our control. The other thing is the opportunity cost, the potential benefits you get from doing other things to embellish whatever it is. And as an industry, Chris mentioned, I've trooped around, lost most of my hair, traveling around the country over the years and watched a lot of things go on, and how we've started with this high ideal and sold things as they should. And slowly, as competition jumped in, we started giving up a bit of this because we didn't want to lose the job to that guy and do this and do that. And slowly, I take the opposing view, because at the end of the day, it's not worth it. You always end up on the short of the stick. So looking for potential opportunities to, let's call it for lack of a better term, upsell and get a better outcome makes you a better seller, a better installer, because installers at the end of the day have to sell their services and rely on word of mouth. So you don't want to lose sight of those opportunity costs. I like taking photographs. Got some beautiful eagles last summer up in the Broughton Archipelago, but not with this camera. But when I travel, I like to have something compact, and it's probably the best way to explain what I'm talking about. We don't know what somebody's willing to pay. We jump to a conclusion all the time. And when you add our desire to close a sale, that exacerbates the situation. So I'll tell you a little story about this camera, because I think it's relevant in the way you think about how you approach somebody in the future. I went in and researched the camera and found that this was probably the best one at the time. Fit my briefcase, could wheel it around and pull it out when I wanted to. But then when I got it home, it was basically like looking through the back of an iPhone. If the sun was at a certain angle, I really couldn't see what I was composing in my photograph. So I did a little research and I found that. And that is an optical viewfinder that snapped onto the back of the camera. So I went into my retailer and I sent these guys a friend, known him for years, bought a lot of camera equipment from him. Said, could you get me that? And he goes, oh, that's expensive. So the camera was, let's say, $400 at the time. The optical viewfinder was $300. He said, that's very expensive. I don't think you want that. I said, would you please get it for me? So he did, brought it in. I can tell you this, it transformed the camera. Everything that I just described was solved, made it a great camera. So I went back to him, being a salesy kind of guy. I went back to him and said, would you mind bringing some more in? And when you show the camera, make sure that the person understands it doesn't come with a camera, but then say, this is another option you could look at, and then put it on the camera and let him look at through the viewfinder, the optical viewfinder. Again, if it's standing in a big room and I can ask you, you tell me outright, how many people do you think bought the optical viewfinder when it was sold that way? So they came in to spend $400 and he ended up selling them $700. 4 out of 5 people spent the $700 because they could visually see and feel what this was going to look like. And we're in the visual game. everything that we do has a visual impact on people as we walk in. So you could say, do you want to see your floor like the one on the left, or do you want to see your floor like the one on the right? Giving people the opportunity to sort of digest what it means to pay for floor prep, what it means to do all the right things to get a positive outcome for them, because we don't sell a floor to anybody every day, the same person every day. The floor is usually 10 to 20 years in the house. They want it to last. They want good value for money. And if we can overcome this as an industry and stop trying to just degrade it to get the sale and turn the register, we'd have a lot better floors out there, a lot better skills being developed as people were being forced in the trades to do better floor prep, follow installation instructions, and make sure that they have great outcomes and have happier consumers at the end of the day. So that's the way, my purest way of thinking works. And it come to this from the point of view that I've seen it go the other way, and dealing with people that have had bad outcomes. And in any case, it's a human decision that decides to make something happen that shouldn't have probably happened if they'd done it another way. So anyway, without further ado, I think it's important to realize that success is not somewhere you arrive. It's not a destination. It's an ongoing process. And again, back to my comment about 30 years is 1 year, 30 times. It should be continuous learning with an open mindset. And the fact that you're on this call is proof positive. That's probably the way you're already thinking. So that's a good thing. I think becoming a master, most people just don't become masters because they can't deal with the boredom, right? But you got to punch through the boredom and repetitive aspect of everything to get to the perfection. And I think the more we get this industry doing this, and Chris and the crew are working in that regard, continuing the education and pounding the drum about doing it the right way, then I think we've got a better chance of getting there. But more importantly, I just have to thank you. I mean, I'm a late entrant here, so I'm a little rusty on my my articulation of the topic, but I'm pretty passionate about it. And it's important for me that we bring more people along, to make sure that the end consumer is getting a fair shake.